Daniel Cross stood in the observation deck of Liberty Station, staring at the alien ships floating in the darkness beyond. 3 months had passed since humanity first made contact with the Velkar, and the whole world was celebrating. Everyone thought this was the best thing that ever happened to Earth. Everyone except Daniel. The news channels showed the same footage over and over. World leaders shaking hands with the tall crystalline aliens, scientists smiling as they discussed the advanced technology the Velkar promised to share, children in schools learning about their new friends from the stars. It all looked perfect. Too perfect. Daniel had been a Marine for 12 years. He fought in 3 wars and survived situations that should have killed him. His instincts kept him alive when logic said he should be dead. Right now, those same instincts were screaming at him that something was very wrong. He pulled up the tactical display on his console. The Velkar had 15 ships in the solar system. They said these were exploration vessels, peaceful ships meant for science and diplomacy. But Daniel saw something different. Every single ship was positioned in a perfect attack formation. Their weapons were powered down, but the targeting systems were active. He checked the scans 3 times to be sure. The Velkar were watching Earth's defenses, studying every satellite, every weapons platform, every ship humanity had. A hand touched his shoulder. Daniel turned to see Colonel Patricia Hayes standing behind him. She was his commanding officer and one of the toughest people he knew. But even she had stars in her eyes when she talked about the aliens. "Still worrying, Cross?" she asked with a tired smile. "Yes, ma'am. Something doesn't add up," Patricia sighed. She had heard this from him before. "Daniel, I know you're cautious. That's what makes you a good soldier. But sometimes peace is just peace. We've analyzed their communications, their technology, everything. They haven't shown a single sign of aggression. Then why are their ships in attack positions?" Daniel brought up the tactical display. "Look at this formation. This isn't how explorers travel. This is how you surround a target." Patricia studied the screen for a moment. "They might just have different protocols. We can't judge an alien species by human military standards. Their scans of our defenses are way too detailed," Daniel continued. "They've mapped every weapon we have, every blind spot in our coverage. Why would peaceful explorers need that information? They're probably just curious, wanting to understand us better." Patricia put her hand on his shoulder again. "Daniel, the whole world is moving forward. The United Nations has approved the peace treaty. The ceremony is in 2 weeks. You need to let this go." Daniel wanted to argue, but he knew it was pointless. The political pressure was too strong. Everyone wanted this to work. Humanity had been alone in the universe for so long. The idea of having friends out there, of getting access to technology that could cure diseases and solve energy problems, it was too tempting to resist. "Yes, ma'am," he said quietly. Patricia left, and Daniel went back to studying the screens. He couldn't let it go. He wouldn't let it go. That evening, he attended a briefing about the upcoming peace ceremony. It would happen on the moon at Armstrong Colony. 50,000 people would attend, including most of Earth's important leaders. The Velkar would send their High Council to sign the treaty. It would be the biggest event in human history. During the briefing, Daniel noticed a woman sitting in the back. She had dark hair and wore the uniform of a civilian contractor. She was taking notes, but her eyes kept moving to the Velkar ambassador on the screen. She looked worried. After the briefing ended, Daniel approached her. "Excuse me, you looked concerned during that presentation." The woman glanced around nervously before answering. "I'm Dr. Helen Carter. I'm a xenolinguist. I help translate the Velkar language." "And?" Daniel prompted. Helen lowered her voice. "Can we talk somewhere private?" They found an empty conference room. Helen pulled out her tablet and showed Daniel her notes. "I've been studying the Velkar language for 3 months now. There are some phrases they use that have double meanings. When they talk about peace, they use a word that can also mean submission. When they talk about cooperation, the same word can mean absorption." Daniel felt his pulse quicken. "Have you reported this?" "I tried. My supervisors said I was misunderstanding cultural context. They said I was looking for problems where none existed." Helen looked frustrated. "But it's not just the language. Their body language sometimes contradicts what they're saying. When they smile at us, their posture is aggressive. When they talk about friendship, their hands move in what I think might be threatening gestures in their culture." "So I'm not crazy," Daniel said. "No, you're not." Helen sat down heavily. "But no one wants to hear it. Everyone is so excited about the technology, about not being alone anymore. They're ignoring the warning signs. Daniel made a decision. We need evidence. Real, hard evidence that can't be ignored. How do we get that? Helen asked. I have a friend in naval intelligence, Commander Jake Morrison. He's good at finding things that people try to hide. If there's something in the Velkar's past, he can find it. Over the next few days, Daniel and Helen worked in secret. She provided him with all her linguistic analysis and observations about Velkar behavior. He gave her access to the military's tactical assessments of the alien ships. Together, they built a picture that was very different from the official story. Daniel contacted Jake through a secure channel. His friend agreed to meet him in person at a bar off the station. Jake was a tall man with sharp eyes that missed nothing. He listened to Daniel's concerns without interrupting. This is serious stuff, Jake said when Daniel finished. If you're right, we're walking into a trap. If you're wrong, you're trying to destroy humanity's best chance at advancement. I know, Daniel said. That's why I need your help. We need to know who the Velkar really are. What did they do before they came here? Jake was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. I'll dig into it. But Daniel, if I find something, getting anyone to listen will be nearly impossible. The corporations have already started negotiating deals for Velkar technology. Governments have invested billions in the peace process. No one wants to hear bad news now. Just find the truth, Daniel said. We'll figure out the rest later. As Jake left, Daniel felt the weight of what they were doing. If they were wrong, they would destroy their careers and maybe humanity's future. If they were right and failed to convince anyone, they would watch helplessly as humanity walked into destruction. He returned to the observation deck and looked at the Velkar ships again. They hung in space like patient predators waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Daniel could feel it in his bones. The ceremony in 2 weeks wasn't going to be a celebration of peace. It was going to be a trap, and he had less than 14 days to prove it. Jake Morrison worked fast. Within 3 days, he called Daniel back with news. They met in the same bar, but this time Jake looked pale. He slid a data chip across the table without saying a word. Daniel picked it up. What is this? Everything I could find about the Velkar's history. It's not good, Daniel. It's really not good. Jake drank from his glass with a shaking hand. I had to dig deep. Most of this information is buried in old galactic databases that humanity only got access to recently. The Velkar have been traveling through space for over 2,000 years. And they've made first contact with at least 17 other species before us. Every single one of those contacts followed the same pattern. The Velkar arrive, they offer peace, they promise technology and friendship. There's a big ceremony, then within 5 years those species disappear completely. Daniel felt cold. Disappear how? That's the thing. No one knows. There are no war records, no distress signals, no evidence of invasion or conflict. One day these civilizations are there, talking to the galaxy, building things, living their lives. The next day, nothing. Their planets go silent. When other species investigate, they find empty cities and no signs of what happened. 17 species, Daniel repeated slowly. And no one has connected this to the Velkar? Jake leaned forward. Some have tried. But the Velkar are powerful and well-respected in certain parts of the galaxy. They have allies who vouch for them. They always have explanations. They say these species chose isolation, or they destroyed themselves in civil wars, or they simply left their homeworlds for unknown reasons. Without proof, it's all speculation. Daniel looked at the data chip in his hand. This was it. This was the evidence they needed. We have to take this to the Joint Chiefs of Staff right now. But taking it to the military leadership was harder than Daniel thought. He requested a meeting through proper channels. He was denied. He tried going through Colonel Hayes. She listened to his report, looked at Jake's data, and told him she would pass it up the chain of command. Nothing happened. Days passed. The peace ceremony was getting closer. Daniel felt like he was shouting into a void. He finally managed to get a meeting with General Paul Stone, one of the senior commanders of Earth's defense forces. The general gave him exactly 10 minutes. Daniel presented everything. The tactical analysis of the Velkar ships, Helen's linguistic research, Jake's historical data about the 17 vanished species. He spoke quickly, cramming 3 months of investigation into 10 minutes. General Stone listened without expression. When Daniel finished, the general was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke. Lieutenant Cross, I appreciate your diligence, but what you're suggesting would destroy everything we've worked for. The economic treaties alone are worth trillions of dollars. We have promises of medical technology that could cure cancer, energy systems that could end our dependence on fossil fuels. Are you absolutely certain that you're right? Yes, sir, Daniel said. The pattern is clear. Patterns can be coincidences. 17 species out of thousands in the galaxy? That's not a pattern, that's random chance. And even if something did happen to those species, we have no proof the Velkar were responsible. The general stood up. I'm not going to start an interstellar incident based on suspicions and circumstantial evidence. The ceremony will proceed as planned. Daniel was escorted out. He felt defeated but not surprised. The political will for peace was too strong. Too many powerful people had invested too much in making this work. They didn't want to hear about danger. They wanted to believe in the dream of galactic friendship. He met Helen at her quarters that evening. She looked as frustrated as he felt. My research files were deleted from the network today, she said. Someone wiped everything I had on the Velkar language analysis. They're trying to silence us, Daniel said. It's worse than that. My security clearances have been restricted. I'm being reassigned to a ground station on Earth. They're getting me away from the ceremony. Helen showed him the transfer orders. They're doing this to you too, aren't they? Daniel checked his messages. Sure enough, he had new orders. He was being transferred to a monitoring station on the far side of the moon, away from Armstrong Colony. The transfer would happen 2 days before the ceremony. Someone was making sure he wouldn't be anywhere near the event. We're being sidelined, he said. Helen had tears of frustration in her eyes. What do? We can't just give up. 50,000 people are going to be at that ceremony. If we're right, they're all walking into a trap. Daniel thought hard. Official channels were closed. The military wouldn't listen. The politicians didn't want to hear it. But he wasn't out of options yet. I know some people who might help. My old squad. The Devil Dogs, a special operations team. The best. They're on Mars right now, but their squad leader is Sergeant Lisa Grant. She's smart and she doesn't trust easily. If I can convince her, she can get the team to the moon. Daniel sent an encrypted message to Lisa that night. He included all the data they had gathered. He didn't ask her to believe him. He just asked her to look at the evidence and make her own decision. 2 days later, Lisa responded. Her message was short. I'm coming to Luna. We need to talk face to face. Lisa arrived at Liberty Station with 3 members of her squad. They met in a cargo bay where Daniel had disabled the security cameras. Lisa was a compact woman with scars on her hands and a no-nonsense attitude. She looked at Daniel with hard eyes. I read your data, she said. I ran it through my own analysis programs. The pattern is real. 17 species all gone, all after making peace with the Velkar. So you believe me? Daniel felt hope for the first time in days. I believe the evidence, but believing and acting on it are different things. What you're talking about would require us to commit treason. If we interfere with the ceremony and we're wrong, we'll destroy humanity's relationship with the Velkar. We'll probably start a war, and we'll definitely spend the rest of our lives in prison. And if we do nothing and I'm right? Daniel asked. Lisa was quiet. One of her squad members, a young man named Kyle, spoke up. Those 17 species. Did any of them have anyone who suspected the trap? Anyone who tried to warn their people? I don't know, Jake said. He had joined the meeting. The records don't go into that much detail. But probably yes. There are always people who see the danger. And their people didn't listen, Kyle continued. So they died knowing they were right but unable to save anyone. That's a terrible way to go. Lisa made her decision. We're in. But we're going to do this smart. We need proof that can't be denied. Something so clear that even the politicians will have to act. Helen stepped forward. I can get close to the Velkar delegation during the ceremony. My security clearance hasn't been fully revoked yet. If I can plant listening devices near them, we might catch them talking when they think no one understands their language. And I can position myself to watch their fleet, Daniel added. If they're planning an attack, their ships will have to move into final positions before the ceremony. I'll see it, Lisa nodded. My team will provide security for Helen and create exit strategies if things go wrong. But understand this, all of you. We're betting everything on being right. If we're wrong, we don't just lose our careers. We lose everything. They spent the next 2 days planning. Daniel used his transfer orders to get assigned to a monitoring station. that had a perfect view of the Velkar fleet positions. Helen managed to delay her transfer by claiming she needed to finish some translation work before the ceremony. Lisa and her squad found ways to get to Armstrong Colony as part of the security detail. The pieces were moving into place. The ceremony was in 3 days. Daniel felt the weight of it all pressing down on him. 50,000 lives depended on them being right. Humanity's future hung in the balance. He stood in the observation deck one last time, looking at the Velkar ships. They had moved slightly closer to Earth. The movement was small, barely noticeable, but Daniel saw it. They were getting into position. The trap was almost ready to spring. Armstrong Colony sparkled under its protective dome. 50,000 people filled the main plaza, the largest gathering of humans on the moon in history. Flags from every nation on Earth hung alongside new banners created just for this occasion, showing humans and Velkar together in peace. Camera drones floated everywhere, broadcasting the ceremony to billions watching back home. Daniel sat in his monitoring station 5 kilometers away, watching through multiple screens. He had every sensor pointed at the Velkar fleet. His hands were steady on the controls, but his heart was pounding. This was it. If he was wrong, nothing would happen today except the start of a beautiful friendship. If he was right, he was about to witness the beginning of an attack that could destroy humanity's leadership in one strike. Helen stood in the crowd near the stage, wearing her official translator badge. She had managed to position herself close to where the Velkar delegation would arrive. Hidden in her jacket were 3 small recording devices, military-grade equipment that Lisa's squad had provided. They would capture everything the Velkar said, even in their own language. Lisa and her team were spread throughout the colony, dressed as regular security personnel. No one questioned their presence. There were hundreds of security officers managing the crowd. 3 more didn't stand out, but Lisa's people were different. They weren't there to stop protesters or manage traffic. They were there to protect Helen and create escape routes if everything went wrong. The ceremony began with speeches. The Secretary General of the United Nations spoke about hope and cooperation. Scientists talked about the wonders they would discover together. Children sang songs about friendship among the stars. It was beautiful. It was inspiring. And Daniel felt sick watching it because he knew what was really happening. He checked his sensors again. The Velkar fleet had moved. Not much, just small adjustments in their positions. But those adjustments were deliberate. They were creating overlapping fields of fire that would cover the entire colony. Their weapons were still powered down, but their targeting systems were active and locked on. His console beeped. He pulled up the new data and felt his blood run cold. The ceremony's timing coincided with a gap in Earth's satellite coverage. For exactly 8 minutes, there would be a blind spot in humanity's defense network. The Velkar had insisted on this specific date and time, claiming it held cultural significance. Now Daniel knew the real reason. They had planned this down to the second. At the colony, the Velkar delegation arrived. Their ships descended slowly, gracefully. The doors opened and the Velkar High Council emerged. They were tall beings, their bodies made of something that looked like living crystal. Light reflected off them in beautiful patterns. They moved with elegant grace, and when they smiled at the crowd, people cheered. Helen watched them carefully. She had studied Velkar body language for months. She saw what others missed. When they smiled, their shoulders were raised in what she believed was an aggressive posture. When they bowed to show respect, their hands moved in quick, sharp gestures. In human terms, it would be like smiling while making fists. The contradiction was there for anyone who knew how to look. She activated the recording devices as the Velkar delegation passed near her position. The tiny microphones were powerful enough to pick up conversations from 10 meters away. Now she just had to wait and hope the Velkar said something revealing. The ceremony continued. Human and Velkar representatives took turns speaking. The translation software converted everything in real time, displayed on massive screens for the crowd. The Velkar leader, a tall being named Zarkoth, spoke about unity and shared futures. The words were perfect. Too perfect. Helen noticed that the Velkar language version of the speech used phrases that could mean something very different if you understood the cultural context. Then came the treaty signing. This was the moment everyone had waited for. The Secretary General and Zarkoth approached a table where the document waited. Cameras focused on them. The crowd fell silent. This was history being made. Daniel saw the Velkar fleet move again. This time the movement was larger. Ships that had been in loose formation suddenly tightened up. Weapons ports that had been closed began to open, just slightly. It was subtle, but it was there. They were preparing for something. He opened a communication channel to Lisa. "They're moving into attack positions." "It's happening." Lisa's voice came back calm but tense. "How long do we have?" "Minutes. Maybe less." Daniel's hands moved over his controls, pulling up more data. "The moment they sign that treaty, I think the fleet will open fire. They want all of Earth's leadership in one place watching, unable to escape." "Helen, did you get anything?" Lisa asked through their shared channel. Helen had been listening to the Velkar delegation through her recording devices. Most of their conversation was boring diplomatic talk. But then, just before the signing, two of the Velkar council members moved away from the crowd. They spoke quietly in their own language, and their words were captured perfectly by Helen's equipment. She listened through her hidden earpiece and felt her heart stop. They were talking about the attack. They used the word that meant harvest, the same word she had found in ancient Velkar texts. They discussed how the ships were in position and how the cleansing would begin the moment the treaty was signed. They talked about humans the way farmers talk about crops, something to be collected and processed. "I have it," Helen said into her communicator. "I have proof. They're planning to attack the moment the treaty is signed." Daniel made a decision. He had minutes at most. He couldn't get this information to anyone in authority fast enough. The official channels were too slow, too bureaucratic. By the time he convinced anyone to listen, it would be too late. He had to do something that would force everyone to see the truth. He activated Liberty Station's point defense systems. The weapons platforms that protected the orbital station came online, their targeting systems locking onto the Velkar fleet. Alarms immediately began blaring throughout the station and at Armstrong Colony. His actions were being detected as an unauthorized weapons activation. Security forces at the colony started moving toward the monitoring station to arrest him. Colonel Hayes's voice came over the communication channel, angry and confused. "Cross, what are you doing?" "Stand down immediately." "I can't, ma'am," Daniel said. He began broadcasting on all frequencies, military and civilian. "This is Lieutenant Daniel Cross. I have evidence that the Velkar are planning to attack. The peace treaty is a trap. I'm transmitting the recordings now." He sent Helen's audio files to every receiver he could reach. Military channels, news networks, diplomatic frequencies. Within seconds, millions of people were hearing the Velkar Council members discussing the attack in their own language. But millions more didn't understand what they were hearing. It was in an alien language. Translation software took time. Many people thought this was a technical malfunction or some kind of sick joke. The ceremony continued even as confusion spread through the crowd. Then the Velkar made their move. Zarkoth, standing at the treaty table, suddenly stopped smiling. The crystalline alien's body language changed. The pretense of friendship vanished. He looked at the Secretary General with what could only be described as contempt. "You were warned," Zarkoth said in perfect English. "One of your own saw through our intentions. It changes nothing." The Velkar fleet dropped all pretense. Weapons ports opened fully. Energy readings spiked across every ship. Targeting systems locked onto Armstrong Colony, Liberty Station, and the defensive satellites around Earth. The trap was sprung. Daniel watched his screens in horror. He had been right, but being right didn't feel like victory. It felt like watching a nightmare come true. The Velkar warships opened fire. The first shots hit Liberty Station. Daniel's monitoring post shook as explosions ripped through the orbital platform. Alarms screamed. The lights flickered. He was thrown from his chair as the station's hull was breached in multiple places. Emergency bulkheads slammed shut, sealing off damaged sections. At Armstrong Colony, the Velkar weapons struck the dome. The protective shield held for a moment, then began to crack. People screamed and ran in all directions. The beautiful ceremony dissolved into chaos. Lisa and her squad immediately moved to protect Helen and the other scientists, pushing them toward emergency escape tunnels. Colonel Hayes, still at the colony, finally understood. She grabbed the nearest communication console and began issuing orders to every military unit in the solar system. "All forces, this is Code Black. We are under attack. Repeat, we are under attack. This is not a drill." The Velkar had expected surprise. They had expected humanity to be paralyzed by shock. unable to respond in time. But Daniel's warning, even though it came at the last possible moment, gave humanity a few precious seconds to react. It wasn't much, but it was something. And sometimes, something is enough to make the difference between total annihilation and a fighting chance. The battle lasted 3 days. 72 hours of continuous fighting that spread from the moon to Earth's orbit and beyond. The Velkar had superior weapons and shields, but they had never encountered an enemy as stubborn as humanity. Daniel and Helen made it to the command bunker where Colonel Hayes was coordinating the defense. The underground facility was crowded with military officers, scientists, and civilians who had survived the initial attack. Hayes looked exhausted but determined when they arrived. "Cross, you're alive," she said with relief. "And Dr. Carter. Good. We need every brain we can get right now." Helen immediately shared her findings about the Velkar shield frequency. "If we can generate an EMP at this exact wavelength, their shields will fail for a few seconds. It's a narrow window, but it's something." A team of engineers studied her data. Within an hour, they had a plan to modify human weapons to include EMP generators tuned to the right frequency. It wouldn't work forever. The Velkar would adapt once they figured out what was happening. But it might give humanity enough of an advantage to survive. The modified weapons were rushed into production. Missiles were fitted with the new EMP devices. Ship-based weapons were recalibrated. It would take time to retrofit everything, but the first batch was ready within 6 hours. Jake Morrison was still alive. Barely. The Wellington had taken terrible damage, but emergency repairs kept her flying. When he received the new weapon specifications, he gathered every functional human ship for one coordinated attack. "Listen up," Jake broadcast to the fleet. "We've been fighting defensively for 2 days. We've been running and hiding. That stops now. We have a weapon that can hurt them. We're going to use it." The plan was simple but dangerous. Every human ship would attack the Velkar fleet at once, using the new EMP weapons to drop their shields before hitting them with conventional weapons. It was all or nothing. If it worked, they might destroy enough enemy ships to turn the tide. If it failed, humanity would lose what remained of its space fleet. Lisa and her squad were on one of the attack ships, a frigate called the Darwin. She had spent the last 2 days evacuating survivors from the lunar surface. Now it was time to fight back. Her squad checked their equipment in silence. They all knew this might be a one-way trip. The human fleet gathered near Earth, hiding behind orbital stations and satellites. 37 ships, all that remained of humanity's space navy. They faced a Velkar force of 28 ships. The aliens had lost some vessels, but they were still more powerful ship for ship. Colonel Hayes gave the order from the lunar bunker. "All ships execute attack plan. Show them what humans do when you push us to the edge." The fleet emerged from cover and accelerated toward the Velkar formation. The aliens, surprised by the sudden aggression, adjusted their positions to meet the attack. They had grown confident over 2 days of victories. They expected this to be humanity's final, desperate mistake. The human ships opened fire at maximum range. Missiles streaked across space, each one carrying an EMP device tuned to disrupt Velkar shields. The aliens activated their defensive systems, confident their shields would absorb the attack as they had absorbed everything else. The EMPs detonated. For exactly 4 seconds, the Velkar shields flickered and failed. In that brief window, conventional human weapons struck bare hull. Railgun rounds punctured armor. Nuclear missiles detonated against unprotected surfaces. Laser weapons burned through critical systems. 5 Velkar ships were destroyed in the opening salvo. 3 more were badly damaged. The alien fleet suddenly faced a real threat. For the first time since the battle began, the Velkar were the ones taking heavy losses. Zarkoth watched in shock from his flagship. This wasn't supposed to happen. The humans should have been broken by now. Instead, they had adapted and found a weakness in Velkar technology. His confidence turned to alarm. "All ships fall back to defensive formation," he ordered. "Analyze their weapons and adjust shield frequencies." But the human fleet didn't give them time. Jake pressed the attack, keeping the pressure on while the EMP weapons were still effective. The Darwin and other ships moved in close, too close for the larger Velkar vessels to target effectively. Lisa watched through the ship's windows as they flew through debris fields, dodging fire and returning it with everything they had. The Velkar began to adapt. Their shields adjusted to resist the EMP frequency. Within minutes, the human advantage started to fade. But those minutes were enough. The alien fleet had lost 8 ships and was genuinely hurt for the first time. Zarkoth made a decision that shocked everyone. He ordered his ships to retreat to the edge of the solar system. The Velkar, who had conquered 17 species, were withdrawing from Earth. It wasn't a surrender, just a tactical retreat, but it was something humans thought they would never see. The human fleet didn't pursue. They couldn't. Most ships were damaged and running low on ammunition. But they had achieved the impossible. They had driven off an enemy that should have destroyed them easily. In the command bunker, people cheered. Hayes allowed herself a small smile before getting back to work. This isn't over. They'll regroup and come back with counters to our EMP weapons. We need to be ready. Daniel stood next to her, watching the tactical display. The Velkar fleet was indeed pulling back. But they weren't leaving the solar system. They were just moving to a safer distance. They expected us to break, he said quietly. That's how they've always won. They show overwhelming force and their victims give up. But we didn't give up, no, Hayes agreed. We didn't. Over the next few days, humanity worked frantically. Engineers studied captured Velkar technology. Scientists developed new weapons. Military planners prepared for the next attack. But the Velkar didn't attack again. Not yet. Instead, the alien sent a message. Zarkoth himself appeared on every screen capable of receiving it. He looked different now. Less confident, more cautious. Humans, he began. You have proven yourselves more resilient than anticipated. Our council has decided to withdraw from your system. You will be quarantined. No Velkar ship will enter your space. In return, you will not venture beyond your solar system. This is not peace. This is a warning. You are too dangerous to be allowed into the greater galaxy. The message ended. People didn't know whether to celebrate or be worried. They had survived, but at what cost? Millions were dead. Major cities on the moon were destroyed. Earth's orbital infrastructure was in ruins, and now they were being told they couldn't explore the stars. Daniel found Helen working in a temporary lab set up in the bunker. She was analyzing Velkar technology recovered from destroyed ships. We won, he said. Sort of. We survived, Helen corrected. That's not the same as winning, but it's better than the alternative. She showed him a holographic display of star charts recovered from Velkar computers. Look at this. 17 systems marked in their database, the ones where species disappeared. Can we help them? Daniel asked. If there are survivors? Maybe. Probably. These charts show us where to look. Helen smiled, tired but hopeful. The Velkar said we're quarantined. They said we're too dangerous to be allowed in the galaxy, but they can't watch every ship, every route. We'll find a way out. Humans always do. A month later, Daniel stood in what remained of Armstrong Colony. Reconstruction had begun, but it would take years to rebuild. He was in dress uniform, uncomfortable but necessary. Colonel Hayes stood beside him, along with Jake, Lisa, and Helen. They were all receiving medals for their actions during the battle. The ceremony was small compared to the grand event that had started everything. But it was real. These medals represented actual heroism, not political theater. The person presenting them was the new Secretary General, elected after the previous one died in the first attack. You saved humanity, the Secretary General said simply. You saw the danger when others refused to look. You acted when action meant risking everything. You are heroes, and history will remember you. After the ceremony, the 5 of them stood together, looking at Earth through the damaged colony dome. The planet was still there, still blue and green and beautiful. Humanity had survived, so what now? Jake asked. Now we rebuild, Hayes said. We prepare. We learn from what happened. And we explore, Helen added. The Velkar said we're quarantined. They said we can't leave. But there are 17 dead civilizations out there that need someone to remember them, someone to tell their stories. The Velkar will try to stop us, Lisa pointed out. Daniel smiled for the first time in weeks. Let them try. They've learned something about humans now. We don't surrender. We don't accept limits, and we definitely don't let bullies tell us where we can and cannot go. He was right. Humanity had announced itself to the galaxy not as victims or subordinates, but as survivors. The Velkar had tried to harvest them like the other species before. Instead, they found something they didn't expect. They found a species that would fight for every single life, that would never accept defeat, and that would turn any weapon or weakness against their enemies. The age of human expansion into the galaxy had begun. It didn't start with peaceful exploration or diplomatic overtures. It started in fire and blood, in desperate battles and impossible victories. It started with one soldier who suspected a trap and refused to ignore his instincts. The first minutes of the battle were chaos. Velkar weapons tore through human defenses like they were made of paper. Armstrong Colony's dome cracked further with each hit. People ran for their lives as sections of the structure began to collapse. Lisa and her squad moved through the panic with professional calm, directing civilians toward emergency shelters and escape shuttles. Helen ran alongside them, clutching her recording device. Around her, the world was ending. The beautiful plaza where humans and aliens were supposed to become friends was now a war zone. Bodies lay on the ground, some moving, some not. She wanted to stop and help, but Lisa pushed her forward. "Keep moving." Lisa shouted over the sound of explosions. "We need you alive. You have the proof of what they are." At Liberty Station, Daniel pulled himself up from the floor. His monitoring station was wrecked, but he was alive. Emergency power kicked in, giving him access to basic systems. He could see the battle unfolding on his damaged screens. The Velkar fleet was systematically destroying every human defensive position in orbit around the moon. He opened a channel to Jake Morrison, who was aboard the carrier Wellington near Earth. "Jake, they're going to wipe out everything near the moon, then move on to Earth. You need to get the fleet ready." Jake's voice came back strained. "We're already moving. Every ship we have is preparing for combat. But Daniel, we're completely outmatched. Their weapons are decades ahead of ours. Their shields can absorb everything we throw at them." "Then we need to be smarter, not stronger," Daniel said. He was thinking fast, looking at the tactical data. "The Velkar have conquered other species before. They expect us to fight like those species fought. They expect us to be shocked, to surrender when we see how powerful they are. We need to do the opposite." Colonel Hayes's voice cut into the channel. She had made it to a command bunker under the colony. "All units, this is Hayes. We're implementing emergency protocols. Focus on evacuation first, then hit-and-run tactics. Don't try to hold positions. Stay mobile." It was the right call. Humanity couldn't win a direct confrontation, but they could make the Velkar work for every victory. They could buy time for evacuations and make the aliens pay for every meter of ground. Lisa's squad reached an escape shuttle bay. They loaded Helen and 30 other civilians onto a transport ship. "Get them to Earth," Lisa told the pilot. "Don't stop for anything." "What about you?" Helen asked. "We're going back for more people." Lisa checked her weapon. "Someone has to slow the Velkar down." The shuttle launched, dodging weapons fire as it escaped the dying colony. Helen watched through the window as Armstrong Colony came apart under the bombardment. Thousands were still inside. She felt tears on her face but couldn't look away. Daniel managed to get Liberty Station's defense weapons partially online. They weren't much compared to the Velkar fleet, but he could at least fight back. He targeted the nearest enemy ship and fired everything he had. The missiles and energy weapons struck the alien vessel's shields, which absorbed the impact easily. But it got their attention. 2 Velkar warships turned toward Liberty Station. Daniel knew what was coming. He had maybe seconds before they destroyed his position completely. He set the defense systems to automatic fire and ran for the escape pods. Behind him, the station shuddered under massive weapons fire. He made it to an escape pod and launched just as Liberty Station exploded. The blast wave caught a small craft and sent it spinning. Daniel fought with the controls, trying to stabilize. Through the window, he saw debris from the station spreading through space. He also saw something else. Human warships arriving from Earth. Jake had brought the fleet. 15 military vessels, including the carrier Wellington, came around the moon at full speed. They opened fire on the Velkar ships with every weapon they had. It was a brave sight, but Daniel knew the odds. Human ships were smaller, slower, and less advanced. This was going to be a massacre, but Jake had a plan. The human fleet didn't try to fight the Velkar head-on. Instead, they used the moon itself as cover, forcing the enemy ships to chase them around the lunar surface. They fired missiles from one angle, then disappeared behind the moon before the Velkar could return fire. It was guerrilla warfare in space. The Velkar commander Zarkoth watched from his flagship with growing frustration. His species had conquered 17 others using the same strategy. Show overwhelming force, break the enemy's spirit, then harvest the survivors. But humans weren't breaking. They were fighting back with a determination that surprised him. He opened a channel to his fleet. "Stop playing with them. Commit all forces. Crush them now." The entire Velkar armada, over 30 ships, concentrated their fire. 3 human vessels were destroyed in seconds. The carrier Wellington took multiple hits, its shields failing. Jake ordered the crew to abandon ship but stayed on the bridge himself to keep fighting. If he was going to die, he would take some aliens with him. Then something unexpected happened. Helen's shuttle, which should have been fleeing to Earth, suddenly changed course. The pilot had made a decision. Instead of running, he flew straight at a Velkar warship. The shuttle's engines pushed to maximum. "What are you doing?" Helen screamed. "Saving lives," the pilot said calmly. "Tell people what happened here. Tell them we didn't surrender." The shuttle, loaded with fuel and flying at incredible speed, crashed into the Velkar ship's engine section. The explosion was massive. The alien warship's shields couldn't stop a physical impact at that velocity. The ship broke apart, debris spinning off in all directions. Helen survived because the pilot had pushed her into an emergency escape bubble at the last second. The small sphere protected her from the blast and sent her floating through space. She was alive, but watching the pieces of the shuttle and the brave pilot drift away. Daniel's escape pod picked up her emergency beacon and changed course to rescue her. As he brought her aboard, they both watched the battle continuing around them. The Velkar had lost 1 ship, but humans had lost many more. It wasn't a fair trade. Back on Earth, the entire planet was watching the battle through whatever cameras were still working. People saw their defenders dying in space. They saw the bravery and the sacrifice, and they saw that the enemy could be hurt. In military bases around the world, soldiers and pilots volunteered to join the fight. Civilian ships were being converted into weapons platforms. Scientists worked frantically to analyze captured Velkar technology from their earlier visits, looking for any weakness they could exploit. Dr. Helen Carter, floating in Daniel's tiny escape pod, was one of those scientists. She pulled out her tablet, which had miraculously survived the crash. She had recordings of Velkar communications, technical scans of their ships, everything she had gathered during the months of preparation for the ceremony. "There has to be something," she muttered, scrolling through data. "Some weakness we can use." Daniel was piloting the pod toward a human ship that could pick them up. "Even if there is, how do we get the information out? Communications are jammed. Half our satellites are destroyed. Then we get to someone who can use it." Helen kept working, her fingers moving across the tablet. "There, look at this. The Velkar shields operate on a specific frequency. If we could generate an electromagnetic pulse at the right wavelength, it might disrupt them." "Might?" "It's better than nothing." Helen looked at him with fierce determination. "We need to get this to Colonel Hayes or anyone who can implement it." Daniel changed course again, heading for the command bunker on the moon. The battle raged around them. Ships exploded. Missiles flew. People died, but humanity wasn't surrendering. Against impossible odds, they were still fighting. The Velkar had expected to harvest another species. Instead, they found themselves in an actual war. And while they had superior technology, they had never faced an enemy like this. An enemy that refused to accept defeat. An enemy that would rather die fighting than live as prey. The battle for humanity had just begun, and the outcome was far from certain.